Welcome to Small Talk Daily for Thursday, September 9th, 2010. This morning I'd like to go through how to deploy an application in WebVelocity 1.1. Now this is documented, so if you go over here to the documentation links, you'll find that if you go through application development, and move this back over so you can see it, and find developing, deploying down here, you'll find that it gives you instructions on what to do. One thing I want to point out though is that, at least in this version here that I have, which is the latest released version of 1.1, this is backwards. You want to change this from false to true, not true to false. So if you set it to true, it's in deployed state. If you set it to false, it's in development state. So keep that in mind. Going back to the top though, what I want to do is I want to take this application, notes.app, and I want to deploy it. So the first thing you need to do is deploy it. And it'll tell you that it's copied it to deployed form into the subdirectory called deployed. So let me bring a shell over so you can see what's going on. In this directory structure, library, application support, WebVelocity, this is on the Mac. On different platforms it'll vary. Again, that's documented in the documentation. If I do an ls here, you'll find that there's a directory called autoload and another called deployed. If I do an ls of deployed, this is where I've saved a variety of things, in particular notesapp.pcl. So let's cp notes app. Let's go into that directory first. cp deployed / notesapp.pcl to autoload, and that does that part. The next thing I need to do, I can do either by editing an XML file. Now let me bring this back over and show you what I mean. So if I ls configurations, you'll find that there's a file called WebVelocity settings.xml. You can edit that by hand, or you can go through the UI. If I go through the UI, it's a kind of a two-step thing. Let's go up here to WebVelocity at the top. We'll go to configurations, WebVelocity settings, and we'll set to deploy server. And then what we'll do is go back to the top, and you see server deploy. And once it's deployed, notice that this says this isn't found. You can no longer use this in development mode because you've turned that support off. So if I go in here now and say notesapp.notes.html, that works because this application is available, but the development environment is not available. Now if you want to turn that back off and go back to development, now you kind of need to go back to the command line setting here and edit that file. So if I go to configurations / WebVelocity settings, you'll notice that this has been set to deployed as true. If I want to go back to the development environment, I merely toggle that here. I change this to false, and here I change this to false. Notice this is the class name, this is the instance. So that's how I would turn that back into a development environment from the deployed state that I'm in now. But that's really all there is to deployment. Now, if you go into the documentation again and look up how to deploy to a real server running something like Apache or IIS, there's documentation on that as well. Instead of going through that by hand here, I'll just leave that to you as an exercise to the reader to read the documentation and figure out how to put it up. Basically, it involves some standard web app server kind of documentation things that you need to do. It's not terribly difficult, but you do need to have some basic knowledge of your way around the web server you're using. So that's about it for today. Until next time, have fun with small talk.